St. Bart's in Midtown Manhattan. My name is Peter Thompson. I serve as the vicar here, and it is my joy to welcome you to this special weeknight edition of the Forum. It's a real honor to have with us tonight Dr. Catherine Meeks, who's the executive director of the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing in Atlanta, and our very own, the Reverend Canon Stephanie Spellers, who serves as the canon to the presiding bishop for evangelism, reconciliation, and creation care, and also as an assisting priest here at St. Bart's. We're going to be having a conversation about Juneteenth in its second year as a national federal holiday and its relationship to our faith as Episcopalians and to the church as a whole. To more fully introduce our guests, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Zach Niane.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Zach Niane, and I serve as Senior Associate Rector here at St. Bart's Episcopal Church in Manhattan, a radically welcoming Christian community at 50th Street and Park Avenue. As Peter mentioned, we are joined today by the Reverend Canon Stephanie Spellers and Dr. Catherine Meeks. Canon Spellers serves as canon to the presiding bishop for evangelism, reconciliation, and creation care, and in 2020 authored the book Church Cracked Open, exploring how the American story and the Episcopal story exploring those stories in order to find out how communities steeped in racism, establishment, and privilege can at last fall in love with Jesus, walk humbly with the most vulnerable, and embody beloved community in our own broken but beautiful way. Catherine Meeks, PhD, taught African American Studies at Mercer University for 25 years, raising the consciousness of students through an interdisciplinary approach to issues of race, gender, and class. She now serves as executive director of the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing in Atlanta, Georgia, an Episcopal organization leading the work of dismantling racism in the Diocese of Atlanta and across the Episcopal Church. Just this year, she was awarded the President Joseph R. Biden Lifetime Achievement Award, the Presidential Volunteer Service Award Medal, and named a 2022 Presidential Award Lifetime Achievement honoree. Canon Spellers and Dr. Meeks, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good evening.
Good evening. It's good to be with you both, and I believe a special word of congratulations is certainly an honor for you, Dr. Meeks.
Yes, thank you. And I have to say that I'm still trying to get used to this idea. When I got the letter announcing this award, I had to look twice to make sure it had my name on it because I thought maybe they mistakenly sent it to me, but it was mine. So I'm excited and thank you.
You're so welcome. There really is something of a surprise element to Juneteenth as an historical event. You know, it took a couple years to travel the news of the Emancipation Proclamation to travel to Texas. And in that way, it strikes me that there's something fundamentally almost evangelistic about Juneteenth in and of itself, sharing the good news of a victory that has already been won and proclaimed and not yet realized. So I'm really excited to be joining both of you in conversation today as we seek as church to make Juneteenth more than just another commodity or another photo op for the church, but to think about what it really means to profoundly celebrate the event. The historian Mitch Cauchin considers the celebration to the end of slavery to have three goals. And he says that the three goals to celebrations for the end of slavery are to celebrate, to educate, and to agitate. So my first question this evening is, what are you both celebrating this Juneteenth, and what needs to be celebrated?
Oh, goodness. So I want to yield to you, Stephanie, to get started.
I prefer yielding to you, but we'll do this dance. So, well, thank you, Zach, for the quote from Ketchen. and just for having the space. And thanks to everybody in the St. Bart's family and beyond for coming to take a part in this weekday evening conversation. I didn't grow up celebrating Juneteenth. I know a lot of African Americans did, but at least where I live, where I grew up, Kentucky, central Kentucky, it almost feels like news of Juneteenth took so long to get to us, similar to the word about emancipation. But so I had heard about Juneteenth for a long time, but from friends who were from Virginia, who were from Texas, just other places. So for me, I mean, I think what Juneteenth really represents and what I want to celebrate is, of course, freedom, but also the complexity of freedom. That there is freedom that is proclaimed and that's given. There's freedom that's taken. That there's freedom, where we know what should be. We know that we should be free, and then there's the freedom that maybe only you carry inside you because the circumstances around you are still so very oppressive. So for me, Juneteenth is really it's a day and I think increasingly even a small season for the contemplation and the practice of freedom. And I think that it's a gift that we as African Americans can make to the rest of the country. And again, make sure that it's not just a day that people get off from work or a day that they drink strawberry Kool-Aid, but really to rededicate themselves to freedom. That's what I'm celebrating.
Yeah, and strawberry soda and red velvet cake, and I don't like either one of those. So
yeah.
I had to think about.
I'll take the red velvet cake. Strawberry
soda. We did celebrate Juneteenth. I grew up in rural Arkansas, and we celebrated Juneteenth more than we did the 4th of July. My family was not that they were activistic or anything, but they just had an affinity toward that day more than July 4th, which makes sense to me now. At the time, I don't know that I thought too much about why we were doing that. I mean, you're a kid growing up, and you get to have something special to eat and go do something, and that was kind of the good thing. What is so interesting to me is to think about that there was a proclamation declaring people to be free, but then it took all this time and energy and effort for many people to even find that out. And we're still trying to find out what freedom looks like. I mean, it's so in some ways, the fact that from 1863 to 1865, 1866, all of that time in there was almost like a foreshadowing of what the future was going to be. That even though there was these declarations being made, the reality of what they were saying they were bringing is still yet to come in actuality. I mean, we still have to get to all African Americans having the sense that this country is ready to say, you are so welcome here, and we're so glad you're here. There is no sense about that in this land. It is still, we have managed to carve out a lot of different spaces where we stand, and some of them we stand in very well, but we still have this kind of veil of you don't quite belong here. This isn't quite your place. You don't quite fit here. You're intruding a little bit. And so I find myself being in this paradoxical place of being glad that, yes, it's a national holiday and that folks are going to talk about it more. And maybe people are going to learn something that they didn't know about and think about this in a more deep way. Maybe this holiday will afford us that opportunity. I hope so. Being glad about that, but then still being kind of a bit melancholy about the fact that we've got so far to go to get to what this is really was supposed to be about. So it's very mixed,
Mhm.
you know, for me.
That word melancholy, I think it lands for me as well. You know,
Yeah.
that I don't want to feel cynical, but
Right.
I'm very aware that, and I said this to somebody recently, it's like, I'm sorry, but any holiday that Marjorie Taylor Greene voted for is not your great revolutionary, world-changing, America-changing holiday. You know, that America is still so very ambivalent. You know, it is of two minds about our being here, about our being whole persons. And and I honestly, I wasn't one of the people really celebrating when Juneteenth, you know, when Biden and everybody said, yes, Juneteenth will be a national holiday. I confess that I was kind of in a place of, we'll see, you know, we'll see. Because it seemed so easy to declare the holiday and so hard to actually live into what it means. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and I admit, like, there's just a part of me that doesn't trust this country to keep its promises. And, you know, case in point, took how many years before Texas even found out, you know, probably because slaveholders, you know, were holding on to the information and making sure that it didn't get to slaves. So, yeah, so there's, I don't know if it's not cynical so much as just realistic. I think, you know, a very pragmatic look at, all right, these are the things America does. America loves to lift up Martin Luther King Jr., but only parts of him. You know, America now wants to lift up Juneteenth, but does America want to invest in the struggle for freedom, or not? So,
and you know, Stephanie, along those lines, we still got laws on the books that limit the freedoms of Black people.
yes.
And so you can go into some of our states and read the code books, and you still see stuff that are vestiges of the holdover from the slave mentality. So I would like to see these states clean themselves up and get those laws off their books. Maybe they would claim they're not planning on enforcing them, but the spirit of them is being enforced.
Exactly.
In many kinds of ways, you know. And I agree with you completely that it's so easy to pass a law, to make a bill, to make a declaration, but then how do you live into that? And the jury is totally out on how we're going to live into it.
Yeah.
Certainly, slavery continues expressing itself in modern ways and iterations still today. Stephanie, I so appreciated kind of your insight that growing up, you know, as a little girl in Kentucky, Juneteenth, it wasn't something that you and your family really celebrated. And I think
I didn't even know about it.
You know, and so, you know, if you had kind of that gaps in your own sort of education as a little girl, as a young Black girl, if the goals of this holiday are to celebrate, educate, and then agitate, what are the stories that we as a country and we as a church need to be educated about and face and not avoid as a people?
Yeah. I actually think that the very story of Juneteenth is itself an extraordinary example to really sit with, just in terms of education. I mean, and it is one example, but it tells the tale, if you will. You know, and as Catherine was describing, you know, like we have this case where a lot of folks are educated about the Emancipation Proclamation. That part we hear. So people go around saying, well, slaves are freed. So you were fine, right? You know, and anything that came after that is your own fault. And so to learn that actually that proclamation didn't change the lives of a lot of Black people, arguably most. I mean, like if you were going 50-50 at the time, like the instance of that proclamation did not necessarily change the lives of every Black person in America, including every enslaved person. And we don't tell that part of the story. Like we love to tell about Emancipation Proclamation, we don't tell that again about America's ambivalence. We don't tell that Abraham Lincoln was actually really, really hoping that upon freeing slaves and maybe having them, fight for the Union, that they would then please go back to Africa, or go to Africa. Some had never been there. There was no go back. America was our home, but you don't get to hear that part of the story. America leads with our history books lead with the tale of glory. Not unlike, I think, what a lot of folks do with our theology. They lead with Jesus rising and resurrection and victory and Christus Rex, but they don't go to the cross and stay there. And I feel like our education, like we, especially as Americans, we have a hard time going to the cross. We have a hard time saying these things are both true. Yes, there was an Emancipation Proclamation, and yes, it took until Juneteenth, June 19th, 1865, for folks for the final group of slaves to even hear that was the case. And then within 12 years, Reconstruction was over, and we were in many places re-enslaved. So you don't hear that either. So when we talk about education, I'm like, just please tell the whole story. Don't just lift up one piece of it that makes you feel good. Because, and I've said this over and over, like, we can take it. We are stronger than we know. We are strong enough to take these truths and not be clobbered by them, not be cowed by them. But yeah, I'm ready for us to educate about the whole story and not just the victory for white America.
And I think we've got to also say that these pieces of paper making declarations about the lives of people really was irrelevant, because they didn't get resources. They didn't have any way to, what does it mean to be told that you can now leave the plantation, but you have nowhere to go?
Right.
So in a way, it's almost like this was a punishment, another layer of punishment. You've been enslaved, and now you're being told to go. You can go, but where do you go? And sometimes people will say, well, the slaves, many of the enslaved people left, but they came back. Well, they came back because they had nowhere to go in the first place. They had no resources. And so I think that people in the 21st century have to understand that when a people have been separated from themselves in the ways in which we were and enslaved for all of that time, that then you can't just overcome that quickly. So a lot of what gets held up as, a way to denigrate African Americans in this country, white people particularly need to take a step back and think about what would it mean to have been disenfranchised for several generations, with a continual disenfranchisement occurring. How do you overcome that? So if you look at what we had to overcome and where we are, it is amazing. It's amazing that we're here doing what we're doing. But so I want people to pay attention to that. I want people to pay attention to all of that and stop trying to say, well, like somebody will say to me, well, you have a PhD now. Why are you worried? I'm worried because I should have 5 PhDs for the amount of skill I've got, but I've had to overcome this, and this. And people, many people are just as smart as me, but they just couldn't overcome all of what needed to be overcome. So we do have to pay attention to the current inequities connection to the historical degradation. And we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. And so then you get into the whole reparations discussion, which I think is a useless discussion the way it goes on most of the time, because real reparations will require us to deconstruct the systems that created the mess in the first place. And so, we're not going to do that anytime soon.
It's repair, not just reparation.
That's right. Mm-hmm. But you can't repair you can't fix a system that continues to do the same thing. It's like, you want me to fix this thing that, it's like somebody telling you to put a bandage on a wound, but then they keep on opening up the wound.
Mhm.
And so you got to leave the wound alone. And so we keep on with the rewounding, but now we want to fix the process of wound. We want to go, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's so ridiculous until I can hardly stand the conversations. I find myself having a hard time being in those conversations because I want to be in real conversations that are really trying to find a pathway to healing for everybody. And if this holiday can help us do that, then I'm ready to be a cheerleader for this holiday. But if we're just going to use it like we use most things to help us feel a little bit better about putting Band-Aids on cancers, then we need to put it aside because we need to get down to the real surgery and get to clean out the wound so it can really start getting well.
I appreciate that image because I think about like if somebody did have a wound like that and they were used to it and maybe they'd been going for a while with it. And then if you come and say, but this is actually, we see the signs of infection and this is gonna do something to your whole system. And so we're gonna have to debride this. We've got to debride this wound and clean it out and do all these things so that it can heal properly. And the person who hears that might say, okay, I'm ready for it. Yeah, I get it, doc. I get it. Like we've got to debride, we've got to clean, we've got to do all of this so that I can heal well. But there's also going to be the person who says, why are you scraping at me? Why are you scrubbing at this? Why are you doing this to me? And you can keep saying over and over, it's actually so that real healing can happen. But if they're watching the whole process and feeling like it's being done to them and, then they'll start to wrestle with you, right? You're like, stop messing with with my arm. It's like, but it's wounded. Don't you see? And that feels like what we're in right now. I think about, just all of the insanity around critical race theory. And, my husband teaches 7th grade social studies. And thank God his school lets them teach the truth. But other schools, even like some of the private progressive schools here in New York City, are getting letters from parents saying, why are you teaching this to our children? I mean, this is everywhere. And the whole time I'm like, I get it. You're experiencing this truth telling as scrubbing at this thing that you want left alone. And like, how do we find more and more ways of letting you know, like, this is how healing happens. It doesn't happen any other way.
Yeah.
Amen. I think that takes us right to our third point. We talked about celebrating, educating, and then agitating. Could it be that our country, maybe even our church, is hooked up to the IV, self-medicating with the painkillers and the anesthetics? We don't want to be agitated. How do we need to be agitated? Especially if the church is going to truly be about these R words of restoring and repairing and, in fact, reconciling. As Episcopalians, we're taught that the mission of the church is to restore all people to unity with God and one another.
Oh, Zach, you're in trouble now.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Do it, Catherine.
Well, but first of all, you've got to believe that everybody is a person.
Yes.
And I think that we have some ways to go with just that work to start really, really seeing African Americans and other people of color in this country as equal human beings created by the one God in the universe. I think that's the starting point for the church, to come to grips with there is one God in the universe who has made us all. And we have got not only the responsibility, but no other choice but to accept that. Now we can play around with it and do all kinds of stuff, which we do. But so I'm just weary of let's jump to bringing everybody in and singing Kumbaya. I want you to shut up about that stuff. I want you to say, let's sit ourselves down and try to get to the point where we can see each other honestly and care about what we see, who we see, rather than making up somebody. You know, if I'm going to be accepted, I got to act like I'm white rather than be the Black woman that I am. You know, that's not going to get it. So Zach, I think we've got so far to go just to get to seeing each other. And I wish that we would have more people who could teach and preach and agitate, disrupt, do whatever word you want to use, to get folks in the pew to start interrogating themselves about how they see other people that don't look like them and who they think their neighbors are. You know, that to me seems like a basic starting place that we've got to come to grips with that. I had to come to grips with that so that I was willing to see white people as folks that God loved, because I could just wipe off the whole table of white folks and say, I don't know who made them, but it's not the God that made the rest of us here, because we're over here trying to stick together and these people are over here trying to push us off the table. You don't get to make those kinds of choices. You have to be willing to be connected to every human being, no matter who they are, what they are, how poor they are, how ugly they are, how bad they smell, how illiterate they may be. You don't get to pick and choose, because there is no human being that's worth any more than any other human being in the eyesight of the Creator. Now, when we get a bunch of folks that actually believe that, we're going to act differently. You know, and right now we think that, you know, the better you look and the better you talk and the better you smell and the better you are, then you must be a better quality human being than this person over here. And that's just not going to get it.
Dr. Meeks, you mentioned a moment kind of sort of personal change in your own life in that regard. Would you be willing to share some of your story about what that looked like and felt like and how it happened for you?
I grew up in rural Arkansas, where the only white folks I saw were oppressors. My father was a sharecropper who every year was just beaten down by the sharecropping imprisonment, that he worked like a slave and ended up with nothing every year. And I watched him do that. And I was very affected by the sadness and the depression around all of that, first of all. And then we lived on white people's land as a sharecropper, and people were ugly to us. We couldn't go anywhere. We had to go to back doors and to get the Dairy Queen. I will never forget going to the back window to get ice cream. You know, now I'm just an ice cream fanatic because I don't have to go to back windows, you know. So I grew up with not having any way to think that white folks were anybody that could be a part of my life. And I, as a matter of fact, was just talking about this last week. When I went to college, I met 4 white people at my college who really understood that everybody is a valuable, equal human being in the eyesight of God, and they tried to live that way. And they treated me like an equal human being, and they didn't try to make me white. They didn't try to change me. They didn't try to tell me I had to be somebody else. They just let me be myself, and they loved me and accepted me. And I started to catch a glimpse of these folks I might have something in common with them. And maybe the same God made them that made me. I caught a glimpse of that. Had I not had that experience, I don't know if I would have I don't know what I would have known, but thank God that they got put on the path and I could pay attention. And then I gradually was able to universalize some of what I saw in them as I found it in other people. And I have come now to be much more willing to just let everybody have their faults and foibles and be who they are, and just say, we're all here trying to do the best we can, find a bandage closet so we can get well. You know, but it's taken a long journey. It's been a long journey, a lot of therapy, a lot of praying, and a lot of stepping back and interrogating myself. And I think most people don't want to do all that work, to tell you the real truth.
So Stephanie, you wrote a whole book about agitation, disruption, you might say. and church cracked open. And it strikes me that it's so often in these conversations to make it about somebody else. Another state, Texas, another church, evangelicals, another person, not me, but my neighbor. I'm curious, what have you been learning since writing Church Cracked Open? And especially for a church like St. Bart's, for instance, that prides itself on being radically welcoming and so progressive and attuned to social and political issues and wanting to dismantle racism and oppression, so on and so forth. What is the message and the challenge for a church like St. Bart's and for the Episcopal Church at large?
Wow. There's a lot in there. I also just want to contextualize what may have seemed strange for people a moment ago when you were posing your earlier question, Zach, about repair and something else and eventually reconciliation. And I kind of exploded in laughter, but only because Dr. Meeks and I have had conversations, several of them, about even just the idea of reconciliation, the practice, the expectation that some people have that we could just go to reconciliation. And one of the things that I really appreciate about her teaching and her conviction is that she won't let people kind of get happy and rest easy with that idea of reconciliation, because, and I've heard you say this, I've heard many say this, like, do you have to be conciled before you're reconciled? Like, if there was not an original time when these races were able to be together and to value each other like that, what are we getting back to? And so that was part of my like, haha, here it comes. But I think it bears saying. And the other piece, and I think this goes to what you were asking me in particular, Zach, is that the way that I put it for folks is you can't reconcile until you reckon. That there has to be reckoning before reconciling. And, I like words, so I like that, but it's also a reality. That if we don't do the reckoning, then don't come. It's just not authentic. It's not reasonable. It's not realistic. It's not kind to come and say, can't we get along now? But a white person or anybody who's on the other side of a racial hierarchy saying, but I wasn't the problem. So we're good, right? And it's like, these are systems we're talking about. These are massive systems. It almost doesn't matter to me what you do on a day-to-day basis if these systems are still killing people and dehumanizing and diminishing people and making it so that somebody who could have had, somebody who got 1 PhD, but it took the work that it would take somebody else to get 5. We have to reckon with that before we can play nice, if you will. And so I think that's true for St. Bart's. I think it's true for the Episcopal Church, that we have to be able to look at ourselves. And again, Christians should be able to do this. We do confession. We speak of amendment of life. We have this ancient word, metanoia, which is all about conversion, which is about saying, God, I've been walking this way, but I hear you calling me a different way. And now I'm going to turn. Metanoia, turn. So it's built into our faith that we are people who turn from one path and walk another. But the reality is that the only, and God knows this, is that there has to be a truth-telling moment. There has to be a reckoning moment that kind of shakes you loose from your other narratives, shakes you loose from your other patterns. And folks experience that, rightly so, as loss. They experience it as agitation. They look at those of us who speak these truths and say, why do you hate us? And I always laugh. I'm like, if I hated white people or I hated the Episcopal Church, I'd be Baptist. I'd be United Church of Christ. Like, there are so many other ways to do this than to be with this group of people. Like, I love our folks. I love our church. I don't know why God put me in this church 20 years ago, but I'm so grateful that she did. But I love it enough to say the truth and to listen when other people speak the truth to me, and not to feel attacked, but to say, oh, this is a part of that Christian formation, isn't it? This is a part of that journey toward metanoia, isn't it? And I'm going to experience that turning at the individual level and at a systemic level. And I can bear it because Jesus walked it before me and walks it with me. So that's what I hope for St. Bart's, that we would be fearless, that we would be able to investigate our own story and our own privilege, class as well as race, completely intertwined. And be able to say, these are the things that we have done, these are the things we have left undone. And these are the patterns that have been a part of our life for most of St. Bart's history. And these are the moments when we lived counter to that story. And let's live more and more like that, But yeah, I want that honest reckoning. I want it in love. I want to reckon in love. So I believe that's possible. And
I love that that notion of fearlessness.
Yeah.
And it makes me think of, Dr. Meeks, you've talked a lot about brave space and being a half shade braver. How do we cultivate that kind of brave space as individuals and as community?
Well, I want to say one other quick thing here about reconciliation, because you notice I didn't say anything about that when I was talking before, because I think it's a word we need to throw out of the English language until we do the healing work that needs to be done. So I just, I have to work on myself not to be unable to talk about it, because it's like it gets smeared on things. And there's so much stuff underneath that needs to be worked on until it has lost any energy it's a perfectly good word in terms of understanding getting ourselves back to God. But in terms of talking about race, it doesn't need to ever be a part of that conversation, because we don't have anything to reconcile when it comes to Black and white folks in the United States of America in the first place, for the most part. But transactions, you cannot have relationships when you have a master-slave relationship or connection. That's not what you have. You have something needs another word to describe it. And I think that one of the things people can do is to try to practice being courageous, a little more courageous every day. We had a lovely conversation with Reverend Barbara Taylor Brown, and she talked about practicing courage, and that, like in the summer, you might walk in tall grass with the possibility that there's a snake in the grass, but you take a chance. And that might be your most courageous thing, that your little act of kind of define your fear, define your sense of limitation. And the example that I came up with when I was in the conversation with David Brooks a few weeks ago was for people, particularly white people living in a white bubble, and being afraid that if you get outside of that bubble, the world's going to take you over, that you might try doing something like, going into another community, a community of color, and going through a drive-through. You had enough courage to go to the Starbucks in the community of color, because it took a lot for you to do that. But that's you're pushing yourself just a little bit further. And then you get to the point where you could stop and take yourself in and sit down. You work on it. You see, you understand, you have the experience that you've been there 5 times now. Nobody's bothered you. Nobody's even paid any attention to you because you were getting coffee like everybody else. And that's all anybody was thinking. You're in the line. And so you go in and you sit down, and you realize you can go in and sit down and nobody bothers you. And after a while, you might have the courage to actually talk to somebody. But you see the process, and David Brooks's response was he never thought about the drive-through as being a a resource for racial healing work. And I said, well, I hadn't either until just this minute. But I think that's a pretty good example of how you can work on yourself. You know, you push yourself just a little bit beyond your comfort every time you can. You may not be able to even do it every day, but you push yourself. You did this much this week, and next week you see if you can go a little further. It's the same, you know, I have rheumatoid arthritis, so I've had to learn to do a lot of things and to overcome a bunch of things. So you get a little better every day, and you recognize that you're gaining you're a little better today than you were yesterday. So you can go a little further. Or like somebody starting an exercise program. I mean, that's another good example. There are the hundreds of examples, but the point is you need to be doing a little bit every day to push yourself beyond where you were, where you are, if you really intend to make any progress. And I do think that for, you know, I don't know the people in your parish, but I know that white people in general have a difficult time, as has been my experience now after 50 years of doing this work, of separating personal prejudice and kind of complicity with racism from systemic racism. And when you start talking about systemic racism, it becomes very personal to them, and they're progressive and nice. And so they get their feelings hurt and think that everything is about them. People need to get over that and understand that you can be as nice as you want to be, but the system out here that's after me isn't going to quit trying to get me just because you're trying to be nice. And so if you get that straight, then you can be willing to understand that even though you're trying to be nice, when I'm not in your presence, my life is in jeopardy. And if my life is not in jeopardy, my children's lives are in jeopardy. And your being nice doesn't help us. Now, you could speak up about the system, and that might help us a lot more. So you don't get to be comfortable in terms of just wanting to be, you know, okay yourself. I mean, yes, you do need to want to be okay yourself, but then you've got a bigger responsibility to understand that your being okay doesn't change the system, because you're not the system. You're just a part of it. And I think that progressive white people need to entertain that more and listen to us as we try to help them understand, rather than trying to talk us out of it and tell us that everything's okay because they feel okay about their position. I think that is something that wonderful. I imagine there's a bunch of really wonderful people in your parish, and I would probably like to sit down with many of them for a meal, but they need to understand this clearly, because it doesn't help us when we start talking about the issues that we have to live with and our children have to live with. It doesn't help us to say, oh, but it's really getting better, and and all that. We don't need to hear it, because in the first place, you don't know what you're talking about. And we know what we're talking about. We're talking about the experiences that we live. And that's what I mean about the necessity to see us, to really see us and really hear. You know, when my son leaves the house, I'm more comfortable when I hear him come back into the house than I was the whole time while he's gone from the house, because he's in jeopardy in ways that a white young man is not in jeopardy.
Well, thank you. Canon Spellers, did you have anything else you wanted to say in response to that?
I want to sit with it, honestly, for a moment, and invite other folks to sit with it as well. Just that reality that, you see before you, these two Black women, a couple of generations, who have done well by various standards, and we're telling you that so much is broken. And I'm an optimist, And I don't think I could do this if I wasn't. Catherine, I experience you as a realist, but an optimistic realist. you help me and others to find hope.
Yeah.
And we're sitting here saying so much is broken. And it's not just a matter of perception. It's not just that we need to, oh, if you just saw things differently. Or if you weren't angry, or if you weren't bitter, or if you're just any number of things, I would ask folks, including other people of color, honestly, to give folk who are saying the kinds of things we're saying the benefit of the doubt. Yeah. And if you haven't experienced it, don't assume that it's about perception and that we just need to change our gaze. I have shared actually, and I so appreciated how folk at St. Bart's received, I've shared the story of my cousin, who's like a niece to me, Masia, who like a year, more than a year ago now, was pulled from a car that she was riding in, pulled out by police and slammed onto the ground. And her friend received the same. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but I think of how America treats its white 19-year-old girls and how it treats my cousin. And I don't want anybody telling me or asking me, well, but what did she do? People have asked me that when they've heard that story. They're like, she must have been doing something. The cops just wouldn't have stop. I need you to stop talking now because you don't know. And so let it in. Let those stories in, and then steward your privilege. And this is a concept that came to me even before I was writing Church Cracked Open. I was doing some anti-racism, dismantling racism work in the Diocese of Alabama almost 10 years ago, I think. And the bishop there had told me, he's like, I got to tell you, if you come in talking about anti-racism, my folks are not going to hear you. And so at the time, one of the ways into that conversation that I found, and it's proved pretty durable, is also talking about race, and the brokenness and everything else, systems, but talking about stewardship of privilege. And the idea that again, if you are on the upside of a hierarchy, then you are receiving privileges. And maybe they shouldn't be privileges. Maybe it should just be what everybody enjoys. But in the meantime, you're the one who's got it because you're the one who's on the upside of a hierarchy. What are you going to do with it? How will you use that power, that leverage, to dismantle the very system that gave this to you? How will you use your capacity to open doors into spaces where the decisions are getting made? How do you use your entry into that to keep the door open so that somebody else who was never intended to be in that room can also come in and exercise power? How do you use your privilege, the privilege of just not dealing, which is one of the greatest parts of white privilege, male privilege, straight privilege, is to not have to live your daily life thinking about all of this and dealing with it.
Sure.
And not offending, not worrying about whether you're offending people or anything, to use your privilege and say, I could not care. I could not speak, but I will care, but I will speak. And understand that the way our system is built, when you care and when you speak, there are people who will hear you, who will write off every word that Catherine or I ever speak, but they'll hear you. So that's, I guess that's the other piece to me, is just, I love seeing white folk, men, straight folk, you name it, using their privilege in order to dismantle the very systems that gave it to you.
Absolutely.
So go for that, and that's the fearless thing again, like go for that, because you will pay a price. Like you will pay a price. It won't be glory, but
right.
like go there. It's where Jesus was. Again, I keep saying, like, Jesus paved this path. He gave up the privilege of being separate from humanity in order to be with us, and then gave up the privilege of not suffering in order to take on the cross. So if you have his name on you, then follow his way. And in this case, it means steward your privilege for the sake of liberation for everybody. That would be the last a word that I would love to.
Amen.
Share.
Amen and amen.
And since we're talking about Juneteenth, I want to say that I hope people will use this celebration, this occasion, this holiday, to do this interrogation work, to sit with what does it got to do with me, and what am I being called to do, and what is my place to enter into this conversation, and what do I need to let go of in order to help create a space for people to be a little braver and a little freer. Let's not just eat a lot of good food and play a lot of games and have a lot of firecrackers or whatever people choose to do on this holiday, which is what, we celebrate holidays like that this way. We can certainly do those things. I'm not saying don't do those things, but let's not, we people of faith, let's not allow ourselves to devolve into just having another party that we're having this party, but it's a party that calls us to really do some deep reflection. And one thing that white people can do is to make a pact with themselves to try to listen as carefully as possible when somebody of color, black, white, black or brown, is speaking to them, and let that person's voice be the voice they pay attention to, rather than editing it and fixing it so that it is more palatable. Just let it, no matter how hard it is, to just leave it as that's your experience and I'm going to respect it. So you don't ask Stephanie what her cousin did. You stand with her in the angst that she has that her cousin was mistreated, because it doesn't matter whether she did anything or didn't do anything, or what she did or didn't do. The experience is still true and real. And the feelings that you're hearing expressed about it are also true. And even if she slapped the police officer, it doesn't change the mistreatment. It doesn't change the feeling. So you don't get to take this just is justified kind of stance to make your own self feel better. That works very poorly. And no matter how progressive you think you are, you kind of denigrate your stance of progressiveness by being unable to let us have our experiences and tell our stories and not try to edit them. We just have to have that stopped in order to move forward in the ways that we need to toward greater healing, greater trust, and greater capacity to create brave spaces where healing can happen.
It strikes me that this work of giving privilege away and practicing courage doesn't happen by accident, but it really takes great intention, because the world is set up to keep the systems that are in place. And I think so often we think that we can absolve ourselves by association with the right political party or the right church or the right people. But what I'm hearing and what you've both shared is that it really takes just deliberate, intentional steps. Not to say I hope that I am able to contribute to the work of dismantling racism by osmosis, but no, I'm going to seek out the restaurant in the other neighborhood. I'm going to take time to let the truth sink in and then decide to do something about it.
Yes, intentionality. I mean, and beside that, you can't be a Christian by accident anyway, can you? You really got to make up your mind you want to be on that journey. So, for me, this is just all about trying to be faithful. People get all excited about the work I do, and I say, I'm just trying to be faithful. Just faithful and focused, and use the gifts that I've been given. And because that, if I'm going to call myself a follower of Jesus, that's my work. And it takes intentionality. I mean, you can't slop your way through this. It's not. It's a no joke thing.
Yeah.
And it takes a lifetime, and it's a lifetime of sacrifice and change and death and rebirth and a whole bunch of things. But for me, it's better than being unconscious and living in denial, I think.
Amen.
Thank you. Well, this has been such a rich conversation. We do want to take a couple questions from our online viewers. If we can, you can drop a question in the Facebook comments or the YouTube comments, or email a question to pthompson@stbarts.org. And as we're kind of collecting those questions, I do have one kind of final question for the two of you. And I hope it's a fair question, and I trust that you'll tell me if it's not a fair question. But even amidst the melancholy and the appropriate cynicism, I'm wondering where you might find joy and hope, even in the midst of it. And I'm thinking of a number of Black authors and poets and artists, such as Tracy Lewis Giggets in her book Black Joy, who have suggested that just as Dr. Meeks, you said, saw the white people only as oppressors, sometimes we can view people of color only as the oppressed, only people to be pitied, only those in need of charity, which is to completely ignore the joy and the gifts and the goodness that is inherent in the whole people of God. So that's where that question's kind of coming from. If you would entertain it, what gives you joy besides ice cream from Dairy Queen?
Not from Dairy Queen anymore. So
No. That ship has sailed. Right?
That's right. Well, I'll just say very quickly, the great legacy of my people is a source of amazing joy for me. I have we have an amazing legacy of people being hopeful, creative, imaginative, and connected to God in amazing ways, or we wouldn't be here. I would not be sitting here in this chair with all of this amazing talent and resources and gifts if it were not for that legacy. So it's an absolute source of joy. And then I just take joy in being alive. And the world is more than white people's racism, like I'm more than a person with arthritis. You have to define yourself in bigger terms than whatever the challenges are that face you. There's a reason. I mean, it's good to be alive, and the world is wonderful in many ways, though it's a mess in many ways. And you learn how to live in the dissonance. So
I had a sudden image when you asked that question, Zach, an image of my first trip to Ghana and standing at the, at the waters after you come through the slave castle where captured Africans were held before they were placed on ships and sent into the Americas. And I remember standing at that door of no return and then walking down to the waters and just thinking, I come from people who went from like that slave fort or that capture, who were prisoners in that fort, brought across this ocean that I'm touching on one side of it, and but they made it to the other side of it. And look what they created and look what they made possible. Whenever I start to feel, despairing or cynical, or, whenever the latest, good God, the latest mass shooting, comes and it just feels like we are in the toilet, you know. The thing that gives me joy is it's like what Catherine said, just realizing, wait a minute, like everything I'm seeing right now, some version of this they saw, and worse, so much worse. And look what they created. Look what they held on to. And I know some people wonder like why I smile a lot. And, you know, I've had folks say, you know, oh, you know, it must be fake, or, you know, you can be real with us, whatever. It's like, no, this is genuine, because I am amazed at this life, because none of it was guaranteed. And I have the joy of my ancestors in me, because I know that I am their dream come true. So like giving up, not an option. Even being swamped by sadness, not an option, because they are surging through saying, yes, child. Yes, child. like, we dreamt you, child. And I heard them and I saw them when I was on that other side of the Atlantic. And they're here right now.
Yeah. It's a great gift.
Well,
I fear we haven't left time for those questions.
Yeah, we're at 8:30, but I'll try to work one or two in if we can just have you on for a few more minutes.
Sure.
One person wonders, Juneteenth and July 4th are very close together, separated by only about 2 weeks. Very different celebrations of freedom. How can or should they speak to one another?
Well, you know, I mean, the July 4th is about the United States getting independence, and that's a good thing. I'm glad that happened, but I don't celebrate July 4th. It's a day that comes and goes. You know, it's like Frederick Douglass writing about July 4th. So it's just not my holiday. And I'm not, and I don't have any negative thing to say to anybody who celebrates it, but it's not my holiday. So I think people who do celebrate it need to sit with these two pieces of truth and work with themselves to see how it intersects for them. It intersects for me by me having the clarity that I'm glad to be here. And that's enough for me to acknowledge that and to be thankful about it and to go on about my business. So I think, you know, you have to be true to yourself. And I'm very true to myself about that.
Man, I actually come from a tradition where we celebrated the 4th of July. I remember just being so into it. I had uncles and aunts who had served in the armed forces, and I had a really clear sense that like we did this. And I had the voice of Frederick Douglass in my head, and that's what creates the bridge for me to Juneteenth, is being able to say, wow, like for me now, the 4th of July is really a day that I look and say, America, you said you wanted to be the land of the free, the home of the brave. Do it. America, you said, you made all these promises to Native peoples, fulfill them. You made all these promises to us. You still have a chance to keep them. You know, you brought, you know, you welcomed Asian peoples, various Asian peoples, and, you know, and then put them to work, you know, making your profits possible. Tell the truth about that and share it. You know, just that I want America to be America.
Yeah.
I used to cry when I would sing God Bless the USA by Lee Greenwood when I was in high school in Knoxville, Tennessee. Hey, Zach. And I cried when I sang that song, God Bless the USA. And so for me, the 4th of July, I'm like, yes, God bless the USA and make her what she said she would be.
Yeah.
And Juneteenth is kind of a fortification time. It occurs to me, maybe Juneteenth is that fortification time to say, all right, people who love freedom, You love freedom? Yeah, we love freedom. You love freedom? Yeah, we love freedom. You know what it takes? Yeah, we know what it takes. And then by the time we get to the 4th of July, we're like, then do that for America. Make that America. So maybe there's an octave. We need to establish an octave of prayer and action and fasting and everything else between Juneteenth and the 4th of July from now on.
Yeah.
So I'll try to fit one more in there. One person wonders what concrete objectives we can establish when it comes to achieving racial justice. Is that even possible?
I don't exactly know what they mean, about that, but I think that people, what do you mean concrete objective? We need to have a country where everybody is treated equally and fairly. And that's about as concrete as I can get. And that's not what happens now. So, legal systems, all the systems need to work fairly for everybody and equitably. And so your skin color becomes irrelevant when you walk into the bank or to the police station or to the courts. And that's not true now. So that for me is what needs to happen. And I don't know how to put that in. I don't know what that means. And that would be, if I had to say what my objective it would be to have that become the thing that every system works fairly and equitably for every person, no matter your color or your state in life, that we would not mistreat poor people in the court system. We wouldn't mistreat Black people in the system and other people of color in the judicial system. If you would be treated fairly, and everybody knows that's not the case today. So maybe that answers the question. I'm not sure, but
I think it does. The only thing that I would add, and it's, again, I don't know if it qualifies as a concrete objective, but it is in my mind, is the objective of beloved community. That, that's a big part of what keeps me going in the struggle and keeps me engaged, and, being able to look toward a day when, and it is what Catherine was just describing, beloved community concretely is communities where everybody is able to flourish. And nobody is diminished, such that, the child that God created is now kind of pressed down, but everybody is lifting up. But specifically, what I understand of beloved community is that we are willing to sacrifice so that those systems shift and everybody can flourish. So again, it's not just happy, clappy world. It's not just reconciled Coca-Cola commercials, there is something concrete about, will you sacrifice for the sake of the flourishing of the other children of God around you? And if that's not concrete, then sit with it longer, because it will get concrete.
Yeah, and Dr. King's idea was that there would be no poverty.
Yeah.
So that means we would do something about the economic system and the structure and the ways in which so many people have so much and so many people have so little. And most of folks in our world are not ready to deal with all that, how to get there, so no poverty and everybody being cared about. Kind of like, that thing they call the New Testament church.
Oh yeah.
Where everybody had what they needed because everybody saw to everybody else and felt responsible and connected. And we call that church. And now we have a structure that Jesus wouldn't recognize, more than likely, if that's the model, because it's like, you need to work harder if you want more, rather than I've got more, so let me make sure you have enough, so.
Yep.
Well, it's definitely after 8:30, so we're going to have to stop there, unfortunately. Dr. Canon Spellers, thank you so very much for this important and moving conversation. I'm going to hand it back over to my colleague, Zach, to finish us out.
Thank you both so much. This has been such a rewarding and stimulating conversation. I hope that everyone, if you haven't yet, will check out the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing in Atlanta. You can follow them on social media. Please do keep up with St. Bart's on social media. You can find all of our channels at stbarts.org. I hope that you'll come back for our Juneteenth forum this coming Sunday. And we'll also be, as part of our Pride series on Instagram, in conversation with the Reverend Senator Kim Jackson this Saturday morning, the first openly LGBT senator and person of color from the state of Georgia.
Yeah, my buddy. I'm glad.
Out of her.
Yeah.
I love it if we could just close with a prayer, and this comes from a Juneteenth liturgy developed by the Diocese of California. Let us pray. Holy and righteous God, you created us in your image. Grant us grace to contend fearlessly against evil and to make no peace with oppression. Help us, like those of generations before us, of ancestors in the faith and in the human family, to resist the evil of slavery and human bondage in any form and any manner of oppression. Help us to use our freedoms to bring justice among people and nations everywhere, to the glory of your holy name. Through Jesus Christ, our Savior, we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
God
Good night,
bless you
everybody.
all. Blessings,
Yes.
Catherine.
To you too. Bye.
Thank you.